I only meant to return a jacket that night, but when she opened the door, barefoot, half awake, and whispering, "I like boys who knock at midnight," something in me changed forever. I never meant for it to start that night. It was late, past midnight, and the air had that heavy summer stillness that makes every sound feel louder than it should. My friend had left his jacket in my car after a game, and I thought I'd drop it off before I forgot. It was a simple, harmless thought. But sometimes, the smallest decisions echo the loudest. Their house sat at the end of a quiet street, half hidden by overgrown trees. The porch light was the only thing burning, a soft amber glow against the dark. I hesitated before knocking, feeling strangely aware of the hour, of the silence, of my heartbeat. When the door opened, I almost apologized immediately. She stood there, Elena, my friend's mother, in a pale robe that caught the light like water. Her hair was loosely tied, a few strands falling around her face, and her eyes, still touched with sleep, softened when she saw me. "Oh," she said, voice low and warm. "You're up late." I stumbled over my words, holding out the jacket like a peace offering. "Just returning this for your son." "Sorry, it's late, I didn't think," she smiled then, the corner of her mouth lifting in a way that felt both teasing and kind. "I like boys who knock at midnight," she whispered, almost as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. The words hung there, gentle, but electric. Not suggestive, just unexpected. A sentence that felt heavier than it should. I laughed softly, unsure what to do with the warmth crawling up my neck. "Guess I'll have to work on my timing," I said. She nodded, eyes flicking toward the quiet street behind me. "Timing's everything." And then, just as easily, she wished me good night and closed the door. For a moment I stood there, staring at the faint reflection of the porch light on her window. I could still smell the faint trace of jasmine from her garden, could still hear the whisper of her voice in my head, "I like boys who knock at midnight." It wasn't flirtation I heard, not exactly. It was something lonelier, softer. Like a woman who'd grown used to silence, and for a heartbeat, didn't mind it being broken. When I finally walked away, I didn't know why my chest felt so full. I only knew that something had shifted, quiet, invisible, but real. That night, her voice stayed with me, echoing softly against the dark. The next morning, I found myself driving by her street again. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was just passing through, but when I saw her car in the driveway, sunlight glinting off the hood, I slowed down. Before I could talk myself out of it, I parked and walked up to the door. Maybe I wanted to apologize for waking her the night before. Maybe I just wanted to see if that line, "I like boys who knock at midnight," had meant what I thought it did. She opened the door before I even knocked, as if she'd been expecting someone. "Elena," I started, "I just wanted to say sorry about last night." She waved it off with a soft laugh. "Don't apologize. You were polite. Besides," she added, stepping aside, "you might as well come in. Coffee's fresh." The smell met me before the warmth did, rich, dark, and familiar. The kitchen was bright with morning light, soft music playing low from an old speaker. She moved gracefully, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs, barefoot, her robe replaced by a loose linen shirt and jeans. I sat at the counter, pretending to be at ease, though every movement she made seemed to draw my focus, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, how sunlight caught the silver in her bracelet. She slid a mug toward me. "Sugar?" "Yeah, just one," I said. Her fingers brushed mine as she passed the small bowl across. It was nothing, a touch that should have meant nothing, but it felt warm, like it carried some kind of quiet intent. We talked about safe things at first, her son, my classes, the weather that threatened rain again. But conversation came easily, flowing like a song we both already knew. At one point, she asked what I wanted to do after school. I hesitated, realizing I didn't have a clear answer. She smiled, not condescendingly, but with the understanding of someone who's felt lost before. "It's okay not to know," she said softly. Some of the best things happen when you stop trying to plan everything. Her words sank in deeper than I expected. There was something about the way she said them, not advice, but experience speaking through tired grace. For a while, we sat without talking, just sipping coffee, letting the quiet stretch comfortably between us. And in that stillness, I realized, I wasn't just drawn to her beauty, or her calm voice. It was the way she made the morning feel, steadier. As if the world, for once, didn't need to rush. When I left, she smiled faintly. Next time, she said, you don't need to knock. A few days later, I stopped by again. This time, there was no excuse, no jacket, no message, no reason at all except that I wanted to. Her garden gate was open, and I found her there, kneeling in the dirt with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, a small pair of shears resting beside her. The afternoon light filtered through the trees, spilling gold over her hair and the petals scattered at her feet. She looked up when she heard me. You again, she said, smiling. You're developing a habit. Bad one? I asked. Her eyes softened. Not yet. I offered to help before I even knew what she was doing. She laughed but handed me the shears anyway. Careful, she warned, roses have a way of pretending they're harmless. The scent of them was strong, sweet and sharp all at once. I knelt beside her, careful not to brush too close, though the space between us seemed to shrink with every small movement. She showed me how to trim the stems at an angle, her hand guiding mine just briefly, her touch light but steady. There, she murmured, leaning closer. Not too deep. Just enough. Her breath grazed my cheek as she spoke, and for a heartbeat, everything else, the birds, the hum of insects, the world beyond her garden, fell quiet. We worked in silence for a while, trading a few easy comments about the weather and her stubborn rosebushes. But it wasn't the conversation that filled the air, it was something gentler, like trust taking root between us. When she finally sat back on the garden bench, she motioned for me to join her. I did. The wood was warm from the sun, the space between us narrow enough that her knee brushed mine when she shifted. She looked out over the flowers, her tone softer now. It's strange, she said. You take care of things, watch them grow, but you never really know which ones will last. I glanced at her, the tired grace in her expression, the hint of loneliness beneath it. Maybe it's enough just to try, I said. She smiled at that, but her eyes lingered on me a moment longer than they should have, steady, searching, as if she was trying to decide what kind of man I might become. The wind lifted a strand of her hair across my arm, and I didn't move it. I just sat there, feeling the quiet rhythm of her breathing beside me, realizing that I didn't want the afternoon to end. It was evening when she asked if I could help move something inside. I just dropped by to return a book she'd lent me, and she met me at the door with a faint, distracted smile. I'm sorry, she said, brushing her palms against her jeans. Do you mind helping me shift the old piano? It's been sitting crooked for years. The living room lights were low, tinted gold by the sunset streaming through the wide windows. The piano stood against one wall, an old upright with faint scratches on its dark wood. Together, we lifted and slid it just enough to straighten it. When it was done, she ran her hand along the top as if greeting an old friend. Used to play? I asked, catching my breath. She nodded. Once upon a time. Before life got busy. Her fingers drifted to the keys, pressing one gently. The note echoed, thin, slightly out of tune, but beautiful in its imperfection. She smiled softly. Still works. Then, almost shyly, she sat down and played. The melody was slow, simple, a tune I didn't recognize, but it felt familiar in the way certain memories do, like something you've never lived but somehow remember. I stood nearby, leaning against the wall, watching her shoulders move with the rhythm. There was a quiet grace in it, not performance, not pretense, just a woman remembering a version of herself she hadn't touched in years. When she stopped, she laughed under her breath. I'm rusty. Sounded perfect to me, I said without thinking. She looked at me then, a long, steady look that held more than just gratitude. She patted the spot beside her on the bench. Come on, your turn. I shook my head, but she insisted, laughing as she tugged gently on my sleeve. I sat, trying not to seem too aware of how close she was. The bench creaked beneath us. Her shoulder brushed mine. I could smell her perfume, soft, faintly floral, familiar now. Here, she murmured, guiding my hands to the keys. Her fingers rested over mine, showing me the shape of a simple chord. Just press. The sound that came out was hesitant, uneven. She laughed again, quiet, warm, and I couldn't help but join her. For a moment, the world felt like just that, her laughter, the low hum of the piano, the closeness we pretended not to notice. Then she stopped playing, her hand still over mine, neither of us moving. The silence between the notes was louder than any song. She drew in a slow breath, then gently pulled her hand away. That's enough music for one night, she whispered. But the echo of her touch stayed, long after the last note faded. The storm arrived without warning. One moment the evening sky was pale and open, and the next it was folding in on itself, gray, electric, and restless. I'd come by to drop off a book she'd lent me, thinking I'd be in and out before the rain. But by the time I reached the porch, thunder was already rolling across the hills. She opened the door, hair a little wind-tossed. You picked a fine time to visit, she said, motioning me inside. Stay until it passes. You'll be drenched in seconds. Inside, the house felt smaller than usual, the windows streaked with rain. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. She lit a few candles from a drawer, each flame catching with a faint hiss. Their light made the rooms glow amber and alive again. We sat in the kitchen at first, listening to the storm beat against the glass. She poured us tea this time, the scent of lemon and honey floating between us. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face for a heartbeat, calm, thoughtful, shadowed by memory. You ever notice, she said, voice soft over the rumble outside, how storms make people honest? I smiled faintly. You mean, like now? She looked down at her cup. Maybe. She took a breath, then added, it gets quiet in this house sometimes. Too quiet. You start thinking about all the things you didn't say when you had the chance. There was no sadness in her tone, just truth, steady and unadorned. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that she had a way of filling silence simply by being in it. But words felt clumsy, too small. Another flash lit the room, and thunder followed close behind. She flinched slightly, almost imperceptibly. Without thinking, I reached across the table and touched her hand. Her fingers hesitated, then turned palm up, holding mine in return. It wasn't romantic, not exactly. It was something older, quieter, two people steadying each other while the world shook outside. Her thumb brushed the side of my hand once, slow, absent-minded, as if tracing a thought she couldn't quite voice. When the storm finally began to fade, we didn't move. The candle burned low between us, the air thick with warmth and the faint scent of rain slipping through the open window. Funny, she murmured, eyes still on the glass. I used to hate storms. And now? I asked. She smiled faintly. Now I think they remind me to feel alive. Her words stayed with me long after the thunder rolled away. It was almost midnight when I found myself back at her door. I told myself it was just to check in after the storm, to make sure everything was okay. But when I saw the faint light glowing through her curtains, I knew that was only half the truth. She opened the door slowly this time, not surprised, just quietly amused. You again, she said with that soft smile I was starting to crave. You really do like knocking at midnight. I grinned, half embarrassed. Guess I've made a habit of bad timing. Her eyes caught mine, that calm, unreadable look that always seemed to see a little further than I wanted her to. Or maybe, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, you just like the quiet. The house was dim behind her, lit only by a lamp near the couch. She stepped aside, and I followed her in. The air still carried the faint scent of rain and something warmer, the familiar trace of jasmine that seemed to linger wherever she went. She poured a little wine into 2 small glasses, set them on the table, and sat beside me. The space between us was deliberate, respectful, but humming with unspoken things. For a while, we talked about nothing. The storm. Her son. The book she'd been reading. But the words were only a way to hide everything else that filled the room, the pulse in my throat, the way her fingers turned the stem of her glass, the soft rhythm of her breathing when silence took over. When I finally said I should go, she didn't move right away. Instead, she stood slowly, walking me to the door. The air between us felt different, heavier somehow, as if the night itself was waiting. I reached for the handle, but before I could turn it, she spoke, barely above a breath. You really do like knocking at midnight. I looked at her, trying to read what hid behind the quiet curve of her mouth. Only because someone keeps answering, I said. She stepped closer then, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her body, the soft scent of her perfume. Her eyes searched mine, steady but uncertain. Then she lifted her hand and brushed her fingertips across my cheek. It wasn't a kiss, just a touch, light and trembling, but it carried everything we hadn't said. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Good night." And when she stepped back, the space she left felt impossibly wide. Morning came softer than I expected. The rain had washed everything clean, the sky was pale and weightless, the kind of blue that feels like forgiveness. I told myself I'd just stop by to say goodbye, that I owed her that much before leaving town for work. Her house looked the same as always, though the garden seemed brighter, the roses heavy with dew. When I knocked, not at midnight this time, but under the honest light of morning, she opened the door almost instantly. "Elena," I said quietly. "I just wanted to, I know," she interrupted gently. "Come in." Inside, sunlight pooled across the kitchen tiles. The kettle was already on, the smell of tea and fresh bread filling the air. She moved with that same calm rhythm, her hair tied back, eyes a little tired but kind. We didn't talk much at first. The silence between us wasn't awkward now, just full of everything we both understood. I told her I'd be leaving for a new job in a few days. She nodded, smiling in that proud, almost maternal way, but there was something else in her gaze, a quiet sadness she didn't name. "You'll do well," she said softly. "You have a good heart. Don't lose that." Her words were simple, but they carried more weight than I could answer. I wanted to tell her that she had changed something in me, that her stillness, her honesty, had shown me a kind of connection that didn't need promises or explanations. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The same place we'd stood so many times before, only now, there were no shadows between us. She reached out, resting a hand lightly against my chest, just over my heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for reminding me what it feels like to be seen." I covered her hand with mine, feeling the warmth of her skin, the faint tremor in her fingers. "And you," I said quietly, "for teaching me what it means to wait." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she stepped forward and pulled me into an embrace, gentle, steady, her head resting against my shoulder. I could feel her heartbeat, calm and certain, matching mine. When she finally let go, there were no more words. Just a soft smile, the kind that carries both ending and peace. As I walked away, I glanced back once. She was still there, framed by sunlight, one hand on the door. And in that quiet morning light, I realized, not every knock is meant to open a door. Some are meant only to remind you that someone cared enough to try. And if you felt something in this story, that quiet ache of connection, that soft reminder that timing isn't everything, then maybe this one was meant for you, too. If you enjoyed, My Friend's Mom Whispered, I Like Boys Who Knock at Midnight, take a second to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who understands slow love, the kind that grows in silence and lingers long after it ends. Stay with me for the next story. Another knock, another heart quietly waiting to be heard.